today I'm going to be talking about groundwater monitoring and its application in humanitarian response, and we're going to focus specifically on the Cox's Bazar humanitarian situation there. Before I start, I'd just like to thank my co-contributors for their support in helping me develop this presentation, but not just that, for all their support over the last few years regarding developing a groundwater resource understanding in Cox's Bazar. There are many other people I'd also like to thank, but they're too numerous to name now and there's not enough time, but there's a list here. So we're going to examine the advantages and difficulties with developing a groundwater monitoring program within a humanitarian context, specifically Cox's Bazar. In an emergency, groundwater is commonly used as a water source and is often developed in ignorance of the underground environment. This is often because there's just not enough information available to be able to characterize the underground environment. However, if aquifers can be characterized early, then this will enable decision makers and organizations to make informed decisions about how they develop the resources. It's not only cost effective and time effective to collect groundwater data to help inform on the underground environment. Therefore, we'd say it's the duty of organizations to do so that they can be more accountable regarding the impacts of their interventions on host community water supplies and on the groundwater environment in general. Our story starts in August of 2017, when over 700,000 people fled across the border from Myanmar into Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh and joined an existing cohort of 150,000 plus Rohingya refugees already based in Cox's Bazar. The majority of the refugees were placed into a camp now referred to as the mega camp, which is the world's largest and most densely populated refugee camp in the world, with over 700,000 refugees located there. Groundwater is the principal source of water for these refugees. During the initial months of the emergency, many hundreds of boreholes were drilled using rigs such as the one in this photograph, manual rigs that were low cost, versatile, and could actually amazingly drill to over 500 feet depth at small diameter. So these boreholes were fitted with suction pumps. They were often poorly constructed, indiscriminately located, and were very vulnerable to contamination. Groundwater Relief was engaged in the response in November of 2017. We were initially asked to do a groundwater assessment of aquifers in Teknaf and Ukiah by the IOM. We found that there was limited information available, that the aquifers down in the south in Teknaf were of poor quality because of the geology there, which consisted of shales and siltstones, and that the aquifers underlying the mega camp to the north were much better, were composed of thick sands. Médecins Sans Frontières also came to the conclusion there was a complete lack of understanding about the aquifers underneath the places that they were working, the camps that they were working in, and that their current drilling activities were poor quality, and that there were significant environmental concerns with the development of groundwater resources. So they contacted Groundwater Relief, and in the end we seconded 5 hydrogeologists into their WASH team for 3-month secondments between December 2017 to 2019. And these hydrogeologists were responsible for improving drilling practice, better designing and constructing boreholes. We moved into mechanical rigs to drill boreholes deeper and at larger diameter, and also to collect good quality groundwater data during the works that were undertaken, and to set up a groundwater monitoring program. The monitoring program was initially commenced in January of 2018. There were 10 water level monitoring points, with 8 of those installed with automated logging devices, and 12 water quality monitoring points. There were initial challenges with setting up and then maintaining the monitoring program. First of all, finding suitable monitoring wells, dedicated monitoring wells, was a challenge because there was no budget for drilling dedicated monitoring wells. So hydrogeologists took an opportunistic approach. When they found a borehole that they knew the geology of and they knew where the screens were and that wasn't being used, then it was turned into a monitoring well. There was an absence of dip tubes in the production wells, so loggers were often getting stuck and dip meters were getting entangled in the electric cable and rising main. Wells were being destroyed as the camp was developed. One was bulldozed to make way for new camp infrastructure. And with rapid turnover of staff, there was a need to continually make aware to new staff the monitoring program and how to collect the data, etc. When it came to the processing of the data, we found that specialist knowledge was needed in order to calibrate and clean and interpret the data. And also specialist help was needed to set up structures of data storage and management. But because there was hydrogeologists embedded with MSF, that was no problem. The following year, the WASH cluster took the next step of upgrading water supply to the refugee populations and designed a piped network system composed of 140 separate gravity-fed network systems fed by 140 production boreholes. There was a sudden need to develop an understanding of what resources were available underneath the camp in order to ensure that the water supply master plan was sustainable. And so Groundwater Relief put together a proposal to build a groundwater model of the key aquifers underneath the mega camp. And this was taken up by the IOM and then funded by the Japanese government. The modeling work was carried out in collaboration with Dakar University and was also supported by the Department for Public Health Engineering. There's a process in order to develop a model. You have to first conceptualize and design based on good quality hydrogeological data. You then construct the model, and then you need to calibrate it with at least a year's worth of monitoring data. So luckily, because of the work we've been doing with Médecins Sans Frontières the previous year, with the hydrogeologists embedded in their organization, we had this good quality hydrogeological data, and we had this year's worth of monitoring data. So we were able to actually develop a preliminary groundwater model within about 3 months of being contracted out to do so. If this other data wasn't available, it would have taken over a year to have got to the same stage. As part of the conceptualization, we had to remap the geology of Cox's Bazar. And the key thing to point out is that actually the mega camp, which we thought initially was underlain by the Tipan sandstone, was actually completely encompassed by this pink here, which is the Dupatilla sandstone. And I'm just going to show you a 3D geological model to make it a little bit clearer about the sort of aquifer environments. We're looking from south to north here. The pink is the Dupatilla sandstone, which is where the mega camp is situated on. And if we show you a cross section, you can see that the Dupatilla sandstone forms a complete but isolated basin, 200 meters thick, many kilometers long, underlain by a grey clay known as the Geraint clay, which separates the Dupatilla from the lower Tipan sandstone aquifer, which also forms a basin. The Dupatilla cuts out as you go further south, but the Tipan sandstone continues down the east coast of the Cox's Bazar Peninsula, as shown here. Once the groundwater model had been built, we were then able to once the geological model had been built, we were able to develop a groundwater model. And this groundwater model was constructed using 6 layers. The model was built from hydrogeological data we obtained from all the pumping tests that had been carried out with Médecins Sans Frontières again. The model was then calibrated with monitoring data from 24 monitoring wells, with the key data sets being the longer monitoring records obtained as part of the MSF program. And the longer the record, the more easy it is to match behavior and trends in order to help calibrate the groundwater model. This short video is showing impacts of the water supply master plan on the shallow groundwater system on the left, which you can see is of limited impact. This is mainly because of all the recharge the shallow system was receiving each year. And then on the right, you can see the impact of the Water Supply Master Plan on the lower groundwater system in the Dupatilla, where the majority of the production boreholes were going to be screened, and which also received less recharge. And the impact was much greater, with drawdowns of over 25 meters predicted by 2022 in the center of the camp. There are many model uncertainties, but I suppose the key point is that with more data and longer term monitoring records, many of these uncertainties could be reduced. Just to show the application of the groundwater model, I mean, here's an example where we're looking at what the impact might be on host community suction pumps and areas of the local community which might be affected as a result of the drawdowns. And so, of course, once you can model these sorts of areas, you can then develop responses. So proposals are currently submitted to mitigate effects of host community suction pumps being made obsolete as a result of water level decline through upgrading these suction pumps. At the moment, we've got multiple groundwater level monitoring programs ongoing in Cox's Bazar district, and there's a real need to streamline and unify these programs. To name a few, we have an IOM regional groundwater monitoring program set up as part of the modelling project, consisting of 30 groundwater level boreholes. There's the MSF monitoring program. DPHE has 52 groundwater level monitoring boreholes, and UNHCR is setting up a monitoring program too. Conversely, there's no regional water quality monitoring currently being undertaken at all. Ongoing challenges with these monitoring programs is, firstly, is the funding. Due to the way that donor money is distributed, there's almost annual challenges in ensuring continued investment in monitoring programs. A good example is the IOM program that was funded until February 2020. Groundwater level data is still being supported by a UNICEF budget from this monitoring network. However, groundwater quality monitoring ceased immediately after the funding ceased. For monitoring data to be useful, it has to go through a process of cleaning, then calibration. Then this calibrated data needs to be analysed and interpreted and reported on to, and the results need to be provided to those responsible for data collection, to budget holders, to implementers and policymakers, in order to make sure that that data is useful and is going towards developing a good response and a good groundwater management. Much of this process is currently not being done very effectively in Cox's Bazar, and so there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in order to make these monitoring programs useful. Maintaining interest in monitoring is also very important. If there's no immediate need for data, people do naturally stop prioritizing collection of it. And we found this in COVID-19, for example. We therefore would suggest that collection of monitoring data should be linked to organizations' quality assurance and accountability policies, and that there should be a requirement for data to be reported directly to head offices monitoring data to meet these policies. Establishing good feedback loops between people collecting data and using it is also very good. It enables the people who are collecting the data to feel that their efforts are not in vain, and it also gives people who are using the data opportunities to feedback and improve on the monitoring networks that have been set up. Because of the fast turnover of staff, it's really important to embed monitoring programs into organizational memory through well-managed databases, clear training and procedural instructions, and refresher training. Humanitarian interventions will inevitably transition into development, and country institutions responsible for water resources will inevitably need to take on these monitoring programs if they're going to continue into longer term. So it's really important to engage long-term stakeholders with the monitoring programs early to ensure that the data being collected is relevant and of value to them, complements their existing monitoring programs, and that they have the capacity to take these programs on. So To finalize, please start monitoring before there's a problem at the beginning of an emergency.